So today we'll be comparing Anglosphere countries, which are basically countries that speak English. The five main Anglosphere countries are Canada, Great Britain, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. It is important to note some do think Ireland is part of the core Anglosphere countries, but in my opinion their culture is more unique because of their Celtic influences, so I've excluded them from this list. Now, what will we be comparing? We will be comparing Human Development Index, other quality of life metrics, and also some cities at the very end. So, let's begin with Human Development Index, which measures the life expectancy, the mean years in schooling, and the gross national income per capita. In Human Development Index, sadly, the United States is last, and you'll see why pretty soon. Australia is first, but why is this? Well, let's dive into life expectancy. In terms of life expectancy, the United States has a very low life expectancy, below 80 years. Compare this to all the other countries which are above 82 years, and even Australia, which is nearing 84 years. Granted, this metric probably has the highest pull on Human Development Index. It's probably the metric which matters most, because in terms of mean years of schooling, which is the amount of years a person can be expected to be in school, the United States is number one. Now, New Zealand is last, and the middle three countries are tied with each other, but the USA has the highest amount of mean years in school, probably because their culture really emphasizes higher education, even if it's not too affordable. But let's move into the final metric. Surely the United States falters here. No, not really. The final metric is gross national income per capita, to which the United States is number one, and by a lot. Heck, the number two country is Australia, and the country which is last in this metric is New Zealand. The gap between Australia and New Zealand is $10,000. Compare that to the gap between Australia and the United States, which is around $17,000. So, despite the United States being first when it comes to two of these metrics, its Human Development Index is still last solely because of life expectancy dragging the country down. Now, compare this to Australia, which has the highest life expectancy, and then is good in the other two metrics. Though behind America in the other two metrics, Australia still has the highest Human Development Index per capita. Well, per capita and general. There's no HDI per capita. My bad. Now let's talk about actual gross domestic product for purchasing power parity. America is by far has the highest gross domestic product just because America is a much larger country. On the contrary, New Zealand has a tiny, minuscule gross domestic product because New Zealand, well, it's a much smaller country than the rest. Now let's go into tax burden, which this metric shocked me a little bit, but the United States and Canada have the two highest tax burdens. You know, the United States with their American Revolution revolting against Great Britain due to high taxes. And look at that, today the United States has a higher tax burden than Great Britain by a lot of points. What would the founders say today? But yeah, why does the United States and Canada have such high tax burdens? Well, one reason is because the United States has California and New York. Both of these states have super high tax burdens and have millions of people. Like the two combined equal almost 40 million people within the country alone. So that probably skews up the tax burden rate. Canada, on the other hand, just believes in more progressive policies and therefore has a higher tax burden. But it pays off for Canada when we talk about poverty rate, because Canada has the lowest poverty rate of the Anglosphere countries. The United States has a high poverty rate compared to these countries, and the UK is at number one, though almost tied with the United States. Now, New Zealand. I couldn't find any metric on New Zealand when it came to poverty. Some sources said 0% poverty rate, which, yeah, I don't think that's right. So I just didn't include a measurement. Now, if we talk about happiness rating, the UK and USA both are the least happy out of these 5 countries. Now compare that to Oceania, where Australia and New Zealand are the most happy. That's pretty cool. Obesity rate, America is number 1. But something before I dive into why, just look at Australia and New Zealand's obesity rate. Australia's especially. Australia has a higher obesity rate than Great Britain and Canada, yet it's ironic because they still have a higher life expectancy than these 2 countries. So that's just a funny thing I noticed. Now, why is obesity rate so high in the United States? Well, it's because this is the portion size in the United States. I can tell from personal experience, partly because this is what I ate a few years ago. America has very big portion sizes, and they're not really eating the healthiest of foods. As an example, fried chicken, not a healthy food. We eat tons of it in America. Mac and cheese, not healthy, we eat a lot. Spam, not healthy, we eat a lot. The healthiest thing on this slide is that feta cheese? Is the feta cheese. And that's not necessarily super duper healthy. It's healthier than everything else, but that's not saying much. Not a single vegetable inside. Now let's talk about economic freedom. The United States is behind Canada in economic freedom. That surprised me a little bit. But why is this? Well, it's probably due to New York and California. Again, Oceania in this. Oceania has the most economic freedom, so they're really doing good in all these quality of life metrics. Now, let's talk about percent of Anglophones, which basically means percent of English speakers. Where did English come from? Perhaps would you expect the place where English came from to have the highest amount of English speakers? It's a logical choice, but not the right choice, because here, when it comes to the percent of English speakers, New Zealand has the most, shockingly. Then the United Kingdom, which has England, is second. And the United States has the second least, while Australia actually has the least amount, which shocked me a bit because the United States is very diverse. So I thought they would have the least amount of English speakers, but I guess Australia is more diverse in some ways. Now, largest city in population. What's ironic about this metric is none of the largest cities, except for London, is also the capital city of these countries. Now, right here, the United States is just very dispersed, so you may be looking at the population and think, wow, New York City is super populated, which it is. But, America is a country of 330 million people. New York City is less than 10% of the total country's population. London, on the other hand, is in Great Britain, which has a population of 60 million, while London has a population of around 10 million, so over 10%. Canada, a country of around 40 million. Toronto has 5 million, over 10%. Sydney, same thing. And I assume the same can be said about New Zealand. So yeah, the United States, it's just more dispersed. Now, the capital city is different than in all of these Anglosphere countries, except for London, because London is London. This is pretty unique because Washington, D.C., how did it form? A compromise between the North and South. Ottawa was a fortified position between Montreal, wow, I butchered that pronunciation, and Ontario. Canberra was formed by a compromise between Melbourne and Sydney, and Wellington is just in the middle of New Zealand. That is why all of these capitals were chosen as capital cities, and that is also why these capitals aren't as populated as the cities of New York, Toronto, Sydney, Auckland. But yeah, I know when I got to this city part, I did not explain that too well, but this has been the Magister, and I hope you've learned something. And if you haven't, well, I failed.